Welcome back to Noise. In the first part of this episode, we sought the villain in the shadows, in the chaos of nature, the passions of the rebel, and the appetite of time. We looked at evil as a force that breaks the world apart, but now we turn our gaze to a more unsettling possibility. Chapter 3: Order. We often think of villains as those who break the rules. But what if the most profound evil is found in a system where the rules are absolute? What happens when a system of order is so powerful that the very concept of evil as a personal choice begins to disappear? Let's travel back to the world under the reign of the Olympian gods. If you read the great myths, you'll notice something strange. Our modern idea of an individual choosing to be evil is hardly present. Individuals are not often wrestling with an internal moral compass. They're simply doing. Why does Achilles sulk in his tent, an act that leads to the deaths of thousands of his comrades? Because his divine mother, Thetis, advises him to. Why does the great king Agamemnon sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia? Because a seer, a mouthpiece for the divine will, commands it for favorable winds to sail to Troy. The mortals are often pawns following the whims, commands, and cosmic agendas of a higher divine power. And here is the crucial point that this world reveals. If you simply follow the rules, if you're just an instrument of God's will, can you truly be evil? The question of personal moral choice, the very foundation of our ideas of good and evil, gets erased. The individual is absolved of responsibility. This is the true terror of absolute order. Whether it comes from a god on a mountain or a faceless authority in an office building, the system becomes the source of all action. And what happens when we fast forward a few thousand years, when the gods have retreated from the world? We don't get rid of them. We just replace them. We build new machines of order. We build bureaucracies. And just like in the age of myth, the definition of evil is shredded and lost through the gears of this new machine. As the philosopher Hannah Arendt observed, the most terrifying monsters are not always those who roar, but those who file paperwork. This is the banality of evil. For a perfect example, we can look back to the world of myth, to King Creon of Thebes in Sophocles' Antigone. After a bloody civil war, Creon takes the throne, desperate to restore order. His first act is a decree: the body of the traitor Polynices must be left to rot, unburied, a warning to all who would defy the state. In his own mind, he's not being evil, he's being a strong ruler. He's a functionary of his own law, a man who famously declares that a ruler must be obeyed in all things, just and unjust. He cannot think from the perspective of another, of Antigone, who follows a higher divine law of burial. His dedication to his sterile, man-made order is so absolute that he condemns a woman to be buried alive, and in doing so, destroys his own family and his entire city. He is the banal tyrant who mistakes procedure for justice. If Creon represents the man who builds a deadly system of order, our next figure is what happens when that system is eternal and absolute. Meet the first and most heartless agent of the underworld, Charon, the skeletal ferryman of the river Styx. His job is simple: to carry the souls of the newly dead to the land of Hades. But there is a rule, a non-negotiable bureaucratic fee. You must have a coin, an opal, placed in your mouth upon burial to pay for your passage. Charon is not malicious. He will not mock you or gloat. He's far worse. He's indifferent. He's the perfect cold functionary. If you have the coin, you pass. If you don't, if your family was too poor or your body was lost at sea, he will turn you away without a second thought, leaving your soul to wander the banks of the river for 100 years. He doesn't make the rules. He just enforces them with absolute finality. He is the embodiment of a system without mercy, without appeal, without a human heart. And it's this same cold procedural heart that beats in Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter. She isn't a dark sorceress with a grand plan. Her evil is petty, pink, and powered by rules. She feels righteous in her work because she is simply following and enforcing the regulations of a higher authority. This villain, the system, is everywhere in our stories. It's the party in George Orwell's 1984, it's the nightmarish bureaucracy in Terry Gilliam's Brazil, and perhaps no recent story has captured this with such brutal clarity as the global phenomenon Squid Game. Here, a deeply unjust society is perfectly mirrored in a deadly contest that creates its own absurd but unbreakable logic through a series of children's games. The rules are presented as fair and undebatable. The pink-suited guards, hidden behind masks, can wash their hands off the atrocities they commit, claiming they're just following orders, and the players, the victims, are often paralyzed by the system, accepting their fate and even adopting the same cruel logic as their oppressors to survive. In all these stories, the villain has no single face. The villain is the structure itself, impersonal, logical, and utterly inhuman. It's a system that doesn't ask you to be evil. It only asks you to do your job. Chapter 4: Possibility. But what if the villain isn't chaos or order? What if the villain is the one who offers a third way, a dangerous, seductive, and thrilling possibility? Think about the transgressive, excessive thrill and enjoyment we get from breaking the rules. It's the joy of doing the forbidden thing, not for any grand purpose, but for the enjoyment of the act itself. The villain who embodies this is perhaps the most complex of all, because on some level, we are drawn to them. Just look at our modern obsession with true crime. Think about it. Who is the protagonist of a true crime story? It's rarely the victim. The victim is, tragically, often like us, an ordinary person living by the rules, whose story ends where the interesting part begins. No, the story we follow, the one that fascinates us for hours of podcasts and documentary series, is the criminals. We trace their steps, analyze their motives, explore their psychology. Why? Because they did the one thing we don't. They broke the rules. They crossed the line. This fascination is a glimpse of what is meant by enjoyment. It's not that we approve of their horrific acts, but we are captivated by the transgression itself, by the possibility of a life lived outside the lines. And this is the same fascination storytellers have tapped into for centuries, giving us some of our most compelling villains. Look at Dracula. Not just a bloodthirsty vampire, but a creature of immense charisma and tragic depth. He's a seducer. His victims aren't simply drained, they're drawn in. Something about him is magnetic. He's elegant, articulate, timeless. The danger is part of the appeal, because Dracula doesn't represent chaos or madness. He represents desire, pure, unapologetic want. He takes what he wants, lives beyond shame, beyond death, beyond the rules that hold the rest of us down. In a world that teaches restraint, Dracula enjoys, and that's why he frightens us. Not because he's evil, but because he's free. He makes us wonder what it might feel like to want without guilt, to consume without apology, and to live forever freely. He offers an escape from the most boring rule of all, mortality. To become like him is to step outside the cycle of life and death, but his offer of eternal life is also an eternity of predation, of being bound to a terrible thirst. He's a villain who represents a terrifying freedom. He enjoys his monstrosity. There's a decadent pleasure in his power, and that's precisely what makes him so seductive and so dangerous. Now consider a more modern god of mischief, Loki from the Marvel Universe. He's defined by his opposition to the golden heroic order of Asgard. His villainy is often about exposing the hypocrisy of the so-called heroes. He creates chaos, yes, but he seems to revel in it. He enjoys the game, the disruption, the clever trick that lays bare the system's flaws. He doesn't necessarily want to rule the world in a Sauron-like fashion. He wants to break the world's boring rules and enjoy the fallout. Loki and Dracula are villains of possibility. They show us a door out of our mundane lives, but what's waiting on the other side doesn't seem to be their concern. Chapter 5. The Scapegoat. And so we come full circle, from the chaos outside us to the order we build, and finally back to the villain we create in our own communities, back to the scapegoat. The theory, as developed by René Girard, is simple and brutal. When a community is in crisis, full of internal tension and resentment, it finds a way to heal itself. It unconsciously selects a victim, someone on the margins, someone different, and projects all its sins, all its fears, all its violence onto that single target. By uniting in hatred against the scapegoat, the community purges its own demons and restores unity. But for this mechanism to work perfectly, the community needs the ideal target, and often the ideal scapegoat is a faceless one. Think about it. When a hero wears a mask, we are told it's so that anyone can see themselves in that hero. But when the villain is faceless, it serves the opposite purpose. It's so we don't have to see them at all. It makes them easier to hate. It's an ancient idea. Look at the myth of Medusa. Her curse is that no one can look at her face without turning to stone. You cannot see her, and because you cannot see her, you cannot truly know her. Seeing is knowing, and knowing can lead to empathy, even friendship. Medusa is damned to be a monster because she is damned to be faceless. We see this everywhere in our modern stories. The enemy is made radically different, like the incomprehensible squid-like Martian invaders in H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, or they are literally given no face, hidden behind the identical white helmets of stormtroopers in Star Wars, or the blank reflective visors of enemy pilots in Top Gun Maverick. They become an anonymous, interchangeable swarm. This is easy when the enemy is already an alien or a soldier in a helmet. But sometimes the facelessness is cultural. The enemy is simply from another country, speaking another language we don't understand, like the generic terrorists in action films like Die Hard or True Lies. It's all the same trick. Remove the face, remove the person, and you create a perfect blank canvas on which to project our fear and hatred. The most tragic scapegoats are not the ones who are born faceless. They are the ones who have a face, but whom we refuse to see. And this brings us to the ultimate story of a scapegoat, Frankenstein's creature. Let's tell the story from his perspective. He opens his eyes for the first time, not to a loving parent, but to a creator who screams and abandons him in horror. He's born into total rejection. He wanders the world, a child in a giant's body. He learns about kindness and love by secretly watching a family in a cottage. He feels empathy. He desires connection. But when he finally reveals himself, they recoil in terror. Society, at every turn, screams one word at him: monster. His violence is not born in him. It is taught to him by a world that refuses him at every turn. He is cast out, shot at, cursed, and so he finally embraces the role he has been given. He becomes the monster everyone says he is. The creature is the ultimate scapegoat because he embodies this entire tragedy. He is the other, different, powerful, frightening. But he is also the villain made faceless, not by a mask or a helmet, but by our own universal refusal to look past his stitched-together skin and see the person within. We make him a monster so we don't have to admit he is a mirror, reflecting our own failure of compassion. And so, our journey into the shadows comes to a close, for now. We started our search for the villain in the usual places. We looked for it in the raw chaos of nature, in the furious rebellion of the wronged, and in the dark, hidden corners of our own minds. But then the picture grew more complex. We saw how the face of evil evolved right alongside us, from a titan with a farmer's sickle to a serpent king whose fleshy corruption was overthrown by a blacksmith, to an industrial dark lord in his forge. We found villainy not just in those who break the order, but in the very systems of order we build to protect ourselves, in the divine decree and the bureaucratic memo that both whisper, "You don't have to think, just obey." More uncomfortably, we had to admit our own fascination with the villain, our obsession with a true crime story, our attraction to the dark possibility of the one who dares to break the rules, because their story is so much more interesting than a quiet life. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery of all was that sometimes the villain isn't found, but is made. It is forged in our own fear. We learn to make it faceless, a monster we cannot look at, a soldier in a helmet, a dehumanized human, an other we cannot understand, all to make our hatred feel clean and simple. We build the scapegoat, a blank canvas to carry the weight of our own darkness, and then we act surprised when it finally learns to hate us back. So after all this, I'll leave you with a final question. Look around you. Look at the stories you're told, the world you live in, the face you see in the mirror. Where do you find the villain? And what does your answer say about you? This is Noise, your occasional disturbance in the waves.